Happy Sunday, folks. Time for another weekly update. Some went on last week. I had a meeting Friday up in Salem. I'm on the Department of Health and Human Services Advisory Committee, the local government one. So it's myself, several other commissioners, and one city councilor. Back when I was a city councilor, I was on that committee. I was the one. And we got to meet the newest city councilor representative to that group. There hasn't been one since I became commissioner. And the new one is another Coos County councilor, which was surprising. And it is a councilor out of Powers. I didn't write down her name, and now I feel bad. But yeah, it's one of the city councilors out of Powers, is the representative now for cities on the Department of Health and Human Services Advisory Committee. There it was. Cheryl Dombros in Powers. So 241 cities in the state, 5 to 7 person council usually, and the one city representative is now again another one out of Coos County, and they are out of Powers. So congratulations to Cheryl. Good to have her on there and see her on the meeting remote. I think she's going to attempt to attend in person next time. I was up there in person because we had the director of the Oregon Health Authority broadly and the mental health director under that at the meeting. So we didn't actually talk about the CFAA, the mental health agreement that I've talked about quite a bit. We talked about a lot of other things, in particular in coordination with the ODHS, Oregon Department of Human Services. Their new executive director is Wendy Wendt, and she's got a particular focus around improving the safety plan policies and improving youth services, which, for anybody familiar with youth services in the state, a lot of struggles there in the youth department over at Department of Health and Human Services. I sat in on a couple trials within the last few months over at the courthouse where it pertained to youth, and there was a lot of delays out of that department of the state. So it'll be good to see this new focus, fresh set of eyes on the problem, and making some progress to make that youth side more effective, more efficient. I tell folks whenever we have the opportunity to work with youth, it's just fewer problems we're going to have down the road. The more we can ensure youth have good, healthy lives and activities and opportunities, the less we're going to have to worry as much about law enforcement and welfare social nets. If folks can do for themselves, they don't need the rest of us, which is nice. I compare it to IT. If everything works, why do you have an IT department? If it doesn't work, why do we have an IT department? Kind of the same in government. Ideally, you don't need me much, but right now, the way the world is, we got a lot we're doing. We also had something come up. It was Patty Adair. I think her county is around Bend, and I am drawing a blank because that happens. But she brought up something at the meeting that keyed in as it pertained to housing development, something I was talking about back in 2019, 2020 when I was on a rulemaking committee around housing development. At that time, the work group was led by a property developer out of Portland, only focused in Portland, and there was pushback from other state offices while I was on that group. Really, a lot of those advisories, they like to be able to say they've got someone from rural Oregon on there. They don't necessarily like to listen to us as much. They wanted to make it so you couldn't require any parking spaces when you develop housing. Now, that's a problem. There are areas in Coos Bay and other cities where you don't have to put parking in because there's a parking district. They wanted to restrict it entirely, which I was explaining to them over the course of multiple meetings. You know, a rural family, if you have a 2-person household where they each have a job, they're probably going to need 2 cars, and they're going to need somewhere to park those 2 cars. And in the end, it ended up being that we could restrict and still require 1 parking space. They wouldn't allow us to require 2 when we look at codes and such, because they wanted to see a study to prove why a family in rural Oregon might need 2 cars. Kind of my experience there was ridiculous at the time, still is ridiculous. Nobody's going to study that. It's a stupid question. But what Patty brought up is happening out towards Bend is there are a lot of developments that don't have enough parking space, and it's actually starting to take up time out of their law enforcement because people are getting into fights over parking spaces and then calling the police. So, not the way I like to find out I was right about something, but it's good that it's coming to people's attention now because some of these things the state comes up with for solutions aren't going to work in the full scope of things. They don't necessarily like to listen to that. But it comes back, bites, and then we got to go back and do the whole thing over because we didn't do it right the first time. So that was something that came up. Curry County, still talking about collaboration around sanitarian. So evaluating septic systems is probably a year or more out. We just got that service back from the state. We're doing it locally now in Coos County, delivering the service instead of relying on the state. We want to make sure we're stabilized because we don't want to have to go backwards. So we're making sure we have the program doing well before we start looking into other areas to assist. But Curry is definitely on that list, which would help subsidize our costs, gets them services quicker and probably more appropriate to their region because they're not relying on the state. And that's still moving along. Lakeside has a new city recorder. I say de facto city manager because that's kind of how it works in some of the cities. Powers, for example, as a city recorder, but they operate pretty much as the city manager. Connecting her with our planning department, community development, so that we can work on getting them set up with e-permitting. It's an easier way to apply for permits, less staff intensive. You can recoup some of the costs of doing it. And I also paired into that conversation that I'd like to see some partnership come up as well around this collaboration around planning departments we're doing in the county right now. I mentioned before, Bandon, North Bend, Coos Bay, and the county all have agreements with each other around filling in when one's short, and also use of urban form to get everyone's codes digitized. Will make it easier farther down the road when we talk about where we can create standardization that's still area appropriate, but also more broadly covered. And let's see, what else do we have? We got that. Talked with the superintendent of Oregon State Police, so they're getting me data I was looking for, historic staffing numbers for our area, description of their mission set, their objectives, their outcomes, the methodology being used for how they're allocating officers by region. So right now we're allocated 14 troopers, 2 sergeants, 1 captain, or lieutenant. We have 1 lieutenant, 2 sergeants, but 9 troopers. And Curry County has 7 troopers allocated, but only has 2. So we, in effect, do not have the 9 that we on paper have because some of them go down to Curry to fill in. So figuring out why that's the case, figuring out why that's been the case since at least the 90s, from what I've understood from people working in law enforcement since the 90s, talking about how we can get this thing working a little better, or if there's another way we can do it that would work better. But mostly they're just getting me data right now. I didn't talk to them much about the other stuff. Related to law enforcement, so folks probably saw this week, there was another bust at the same brick house in Coos Bay down near Mingus Park. I live on the other end of Mingus Park, so when I take walks, I go walk by that house just to see what it looks like lately. It's been three busts in 12 months. They've now pulled a total. I think this bust was only 13 people they pulled out of that house. Over the course of these last 12 months, more than 50 people have been pulled out of that house. I think there's been at least 1 overdose fatality. Problem house. Did some research. Looks like the folks that owned it passed away. There's a thing about a collection agency going after the estate, and I've reached out to that collection agency to ask them about that house. I know City of Coos Bay is also looking at what they can do with it, but something I've done with some of the other problem areas we have within the county is I just contact the people that own the property that's being a problem and talk to them about, what's happening here, how can we make it better, how can we solve this problem together. So I've left a message with the collection folks. I don't know how likely they are to respond to me. Usually property owners do, but that's not really an option in this case. So I think everybody's working on what to do about that house because, like I keep saying, that thing's been hit 3 times in the last 12 months. One time they blew the doors off with breaching charges. It's getting excessive. We got to do something with that. Application was in and acknowledged for the Ocean Policy Advisory Council. That was something I was asked about applying to. It's a state agency that oversees the coastal interests off of our shore. It works with state agencies, conservation interests, general public, government, talking about how we can achieve things out in our water in a way that kind of meets all needs, and then evaluates proposals. So my application is into that, and it's governor appointed. We'll see how that goes, but they are supposed to have someone in government from the South Coast. So I don't know how many other people might have applied for that one. We got that. And stuff around mental health now. So there was an article, I believe it was this week, that the state hospital has now paid about $1.4 million in contempt fines to the federal government since June and as of now. That is coming from $500 a day fines for everyone waiting to go to aid and assist services per day more than 7 days. Or over 7 days. So, rabbit hole. But aid and assist is when a person has committed a crime. They need to be evaluated to stand trial, see if they can be stabilized to stand trial. Aid and assist in their own defense is where the term comes from. And state's not been doing that. It's been not meeting certain obligations from lawsuits since the early 2000s. And now the federal courts are actually levying fines about it. That's where a lot of the concern I brought up in the past is around mental health agreement with the state. I'm worried and others are worried. 0 of 36 counties have signed this thing. Folks are worried that the state's trying to pass that liability on to counties. And that really put a number on it. $1.4 million over the course of 6 months for all the cases that are supposed to go up there. In Coos County, we have an unusual number of people that would normally go to be checked if they can aid and assist in their own defense. That thing beeped at me. Huh. There you go. Sorry, work phone beeped, and I usually look when that happens. So, around that, I wrote an article, and I'll be putting it out to different papers this week about the state of the mental health system in Oregon and part of how I think it got here. And it's titled the Systemic Criminalization of Mental Illness in Oregon. It'll go out in papers. Last time I wrote one, it ran in the Oregonian. The Lund Report is a medical report, and some other ones. Nutshell, a bed at the state hospital costs the state about $1,777. Some of that's Medicaid. I don't know how the rest of it factors in. But a bed at the prison, state prison, costs about $173 a night. So the state is saving over $1,600 per night per person if they go into the criminal justice system instead of the mental health system. We are understaffed at the state hospital to take all of the mental health patients who have committed crimes. We can see that through these aid and assist numbers, these fines, who need assessed to stand trial and instead end up in the legal system. And because those crimes are often, these are major ones going up there right now. Other ones like, say, petty theft, say, trespassing, people trying to get food the wrong way, people trying to stay warm, places they're not allowed. Those cases aren't going to result in a sentence of over a year, and it takes over a year of sentence to land in the state prison. So even the $173 never happens. From the state's perspective, they've now saved all of that money because those folks are now in local jails, if the local jails even have capacity. An example I gave when I was in Salem last Friday was the 30th of January of this year. Point in time count, we count all the homeless in the county in one night as near as we can. It's a nationwide thing to get demographic numbers in the country. And we had about 48 people in our jail that night, and 28 were on mental health meds. So as I pointed out at the state, more than half of our jail right now is operating as a mental health facility. That's not the way anyone wants it. It's not good for the inmates. Our officers really don't want to be doing that either. The deputies don't want to be doing that. But that's what this situation has caused. It saves the state a lot of money, and it pushes that issue locally where they'll never see the bill. And it's detrimental to the welfare of these individuals as well. They need to be receiving assistance. They don't need to be sitting in a jail. Like I say, I think every one of our deputies would agree that's not the place for folks that are having these problems. I know a number of our deputies feel bad that this is the situation. They want these people to have better lives. They don't get into this work because they want to see people in those conditions. They want to see people get better. But that is where that situation is at right now. And of the 48 that day, 11 were homeless. And of those 11, 10 of them were mentally ill. They were on medications. So I remind the state of that situation when I have the chance, because I think it's important that we have the number of individuals suffering from this, not just in terms of dollars, but how many people's lives are in that situation, and we need to address it. So there will be an article coming out, is the really short version of all that rambling. And last bit is just something I've talked with different agencies in the area about, just kind of giving a heads up to not just service providers, but also law enforcement side, state offices that may not be aware. But with the ending of rental assistances coming up January 1st with the new budget, the federal budget, there's been money put into making sure people stay housed. So the rental assistance, worth noting as well, that's not just assistance to the individual to keep them housed, that's an assurance that the landlord is going to get paid. That assistance is ending for about 140,000 people around the country. So that is, I don't know if that's people or households, but that was the number. That'll be however many people don't pay their rent, so it'll be a problem for landlords for one, but on the end, the eviction notices and all that stuff. But on the other, that's 140 people that have been housed that won't be able to afford to be housed. So there's also the expectation nationwide we're going to see a surge in homelessness over the next few months as these changes go into effect, and different states have different eviction policies. But certainly by the end of March, I would imagine, we'll see an increase in homelessness in Oregon. So things we're also getting ready for, because that also has downstream effects. You have the human aspect. Nobody should be out on the street. We're the richest country in the world. People should be able to at least have somewhere warm to sleep and food to eat. For the folks that want to get to a better situation in their life, it's very hard to do that when you're freezing at night and you have no food. So we have to give people a chance, a fighting chance. But that's also going to take up more time in our ERs, because these folks aren't going to stay healthy living in that situation. Law enforcement time. People are going to call in homeless folks out on the street. That's a thing that happens. People are going to get desperate. They're not going to starve to death. They're going to find food. They're going to find somewhere to stay warm. That won't always jive with the law, so that'll take up time. So things we're getting ready for, because changes are happening a lot. They're happening very quickly. I get asked a bit, just as a thing I remembered while I'm reading through this. I have not heard any more about if or where ICE might put a detention center in Oregon. Let's see. Yeah, I've just not heard any more about it. There are contractors that reach out. We know that now. So if the names pop up, we'll be familiar. But near as I know, near as I've heard, there's nowhere else being considered. I did see an article today that there was thoughts about somewhere in Portland, but that seems like a really odd choice for people to make right now. But yeah, the short answer on that, I don't know anything about the ICE side. They were supposed to get me more information on some questions I asked them when the government reopened, and they're not responding. They're not responding to Val Hoyle's office or the judiciary, apparently. According to the Judiciary Committee over in D.C., ICE is supposed to respond to me directly with some answers to what my questions were. Haven't gotten those either. Not overly surprised, been pretty unimpressed, but definitely the least responsive federal agency I've dealt with to date, which is kind of saying something sometimes. I should say I've had good interactions with all the law enforcement agencies at the federal level that I've interacted with so far, other than these folks. But yep, that's about it. I have started rambling, so we'll close it and talk to everybody next Sunday. Have a good one.